You're listening to Ecosysteming, the podcast redefining economic development through the lens of equitable entrepreneurship, 2 decades in the making. Join NC Idea's Tom Rue as he engages with entrepreneurs and experts who are challenging the status quo and driving lasting change.
Hello, listeners of the Ecosysteming podcast. I am your host, Tom Rue, and today it is my great pleasure to be joined by Laura Smailes, who is the relationship manager at Everblue, which is an accredited national training provider. But many of you listening to this probably know her a little bit better as the former director or assistant director of the Center for Entrepreneurship and Innovation at UNC Charlotte. Well, let me just welcome you on first before I make my little quip that I was about to, Laura. So thank you for joining us today.
Thanks for the invitation. This is amazing.
Now, when I was prepping for today's conversation, the first thing I wanted to say, because I crack myself up. I think I'm the funniest person in the room. It just always stymies us here. If you hear us clutch for a second, because there is UNCC has the CEI, but UNCW, they are CIE.
Yes, absolutely.
Prefaced with the UNC as well. So, and I'm just being silly. I actually don't mind those names because it's literal. It is literal to what you guys do, right? And what the mission of that was.
I don't know who decides what comes first or how that came about. I just know that I actually worked with UNCW years ago when I had my startup. We had Wilmington. We had an office in Wilmington as well. So I knew all of them very well. And then came to be when we handed over our startup and sort of went our separate ways. I ended up going, at the time it was Ventureprise before it became CEI. So, but I had gone through customer discovery at UNC Charlotte, but had also worked in UNC Wilmington. So I've had a long-standing relationship with both of those.
Well, truth be told, and you mentioned it around here, you can still hear the Ventureprise name because that's how I first got to meet y'all.
And a lot of people still say it to this day. A lot of people still say it because we have people that went in through the programming back then and they'll still say that. I actually remember we were taping and it could have been for NC Ideas video a couple years ago, but I had signs that said CEI because
just as kind of remind you. Got to get the new branding right. Wait, may I ask, what was the impetus for the name change?
It just sort of did. It went from a nonprofit to part of the school. Ventureprise was when it was the nonprofit. So it sort of went through that transformation, became a part at the time of research and economic development. It's now part of the Belk College of Business. So it's gone through some of those transformations, but that was the big one when it went from the nonprofit over. We had it for a few years where it wasn't the nonprofit we were part of, but they just started to brand it the other way. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, you wonder because there's something that, right, it wasn't broke, so you didn't need to fix it. So there had to be some other reason for it. And before we get a little deeper, let me also say another way people know you there in the region is through Pitch Breakfast as well.
Yes, I started, I actually pitched at it, and I think it was its first or second year. And we did our pitch when I had my startup, and I had never been a part of the, the entrepreneurial ecosystem. I really didn't know what this all was.
Yeah, I got to tell you, that surprised me. I'm sorry, I cut you off, which is kind of rude for the host to do.
No.
But you are such a cherished member of our ecosystem.
Oh, thank you.
You're like an old soul in our ecosystem with this work. I think anybody that would engage with you for a half hour or more would think that you're probably one of the OGs of the ecosystem.
It was really crazy. So I think it was 2014. I graduated with my master's, met the 2 undergrad students who had the innovation, and we formed a business. But yeah, I started doing pitch, we pitched. And then we actually, because I was part of CLT Jewel, we had joined that as sort of the scholarship program because we didn't have enough money to do anything like that. But they said, hey, you're this new project, you're dealing with energy, come join us. And then they had us pitch at Pitch Breakfast. And so I really just dove headfirst and started going to every pitch breakfast because it was different. I was learning something every single time, and finally one just said, "Listen, can you just come on officially?" And 12 years later, I'm still there.
That's
So
incredible.
and it's still that amazing thing where we really try to keep the learning factor. It's so when you start thinking about, I've got to do this pitch, I've got to find investors, or I've got to find partners. How do I do that ask? And I just remember Pitch Breakfast being that resource. And we both, Juan and I, want to continue it. Vic Howie, who we call the godfather of Pitch Breakfast, he sort of retired and handed it over. And we really want to keep that basic premise of it is a place to learn. It's not just for the people pitching, but everybody in the audience can really understand, because you're getting real time feedback from investors, people that are investing and saying, this was done well. And we do such different and diverse founders and businesses. So, we sort of slide in a retail or something, a product, and then we have maybe IT, so it's all those different things because it's different feedback for each one. So I loved it then and still have that love for it now, just because it's such a welcoming environment in terms of come and learn and ask the questions that you may not want to ask, somewhere else. And these, all of our panelists have been there for years and really want to watch these people succeed. And so it's still that great feeling that I get. And that was one of the things when I was sort of going over and transferring out of the university. I really said I want to keep a hold on to the ecosystem, the entrepreneur ecosystem, and they were all for it.
Oh yeah, they're not going to let you go if they can
Yeah.
avoid that. So if my math works, and it does, you were doing pitch breakfast for years before you joined Venture Prize.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I was doing it for 4 years. Yeah.
Is pitch breakfast a national thing, or is it?
No, we do it. We actually, it was in Charlotte. We actually started right before COVID. We started going to Charleston, South Carolina, just because Vic had an attachment there. But then we also started doing some in Asheville. So we were doing some regionally, and then we're looking at doing it again because it's something that we've really liked partnering with other ecosystem partners through NCIDEA. We've liked, doing it at the Hatch is where we did it in Asheville. So, that's something that we've really looked at doing, but we were doing it regularly before COVID, and then COVID hit.
So I think I can predict the answer to this. So is there a 1 million cups franchise in Charlotte?
Yes.
There
Mhm.
is, because
Yes.
it's
Mhm.
curious. See, 1 million cups is national, and it was a program that my um, during my tenure at Kaufman. So it was my team that gave birth to that. But but the way we sold the benefit of that, the community benefit, is almost verbatim what you said about pitch breakfast, right? I mean, I'll give you a little bit of trivia. Like we never intended it to be like this new program. The origin story, and forgive me if I shared this already with you, but the origin story of 1 million cups was our entrepreneurship department. I ran it like a startup, and so we were the crazy kids that were always throwing events into the late hours, and the rest of the foundation was a little more staid, as you might imagine, especially because it's such an institution in Kansas City. And we were having a staff meeting and came to the epiphany that the quote foundation of entrepreneurship, the vast majority of the employees had no idea about, didn't know entrepreneurs in the community, didn't have connection. So we didn't even call. Yeah, obviously we hadn't called it 1 million cups, but we thought, like, well, you know what might be cool, for the sake, for the benefit of both, right? Like, let's invite a couple cool founders that we know to come in. And back in those days, it was during breakfast because the foundation served breakfast. So the value prop to the employees was, come in a half hour early, grab your tray, and then we'll be over on the one side of the cafeteria. And we'll let you, hear these pitches. And it's a very safe environment, closed to, there's no media, there's no, and that time there's absolutely no investors. It was just this educational thing. And I think it took us about 4 whole weeks before we went, hmm, there, this has got some value here,
Yes.
right? And then, like in those days, because it was Kaufman that was hosting it, we'd get on average about 300 people every week.
That's amazing.
And yeah, I mean, yes, but it's an unfair comparison, right? Because as someone told me that in those early days, Kaufman was not a very public organization. And this is somebody else's words, not mine. But he said, he came up to me at one of the 1 million cups and thanked me. He was thanking me profusely. And, I'm not a native of Kansas City. I mean, I know all the history of Mr. K and all that, but I didn't grow up in that environment. And so it wasn't as personal for me as it was for this gentleman who said, thank you, thank you. I'm like, yeah, hey man, that's cool. Like it's perfect. And he's like, no, Tom, you don't understand. The Coffin Foundation for the first whatever years of its existence was like Willy Wonka's chocolate factory. And until 1 million cups, you guys weren't putting chocolate bars with golden tickets out there.
Okay, so that sort of made it more forward facing and relatable and all that.
So yes. And so like people were like, oh, so now we can meet some of the people that work here and see you out in the community and engaging. But again, I go back to, and we knew there was no IP around 1 million cups. It was again exactly how you described pitch breakfast. The little nuances we had were like, specifically because it was at Kaufman, and Kaufman was way more concerned than like we are about enduring private benefit. You weren't allowed to ask for money. Like you couldn't make it as an investment pitch. So what we did was we just would close. The routine was to close every 1 million cups with a community ask, right? And so that really spawned some community engagement. I think one of my favorites was this young man. He was building this 6-figure business, and I don't mean just 100 grand. I think he was already at like a $300,000 ARR. He would custom paint video game controllers. So I think I'm not a gamer, so I don't know. I'm an old man. I don't know about those computer thingies. But apparently there was a market for custom painting them.
Wow.
And he got
Yeah.
NCAA licensing rights. So you could get,
Oh, he took it and ran then.
yes. And so basically what happened, he's pitching his thing and he said, my mom tells me I can't do this anymore out of the basement. The neighbors won't even talk to us anymore because UPS is here, 7 times a day doing drop offs and pickups. And he's like, I need, I don't know, 3,000 square foot space, like blah, blah, blah. So he just throws it out there like, this is what I need. And this elderly gentleman sitting in the back who'd been coming for months, never said a word, never engaged in any way. He gets up and says, I own several buildings in the warehouse district, downtown Kansas City. Like, I'll find you 5,000 square feet. Don't worry about it. I won't charge you anything. I mean, like, how cool is that?
You never know until you ask. And I think that that's sort of where, so basically, where pitch breakfast, I think, is a bit different. Like, so basically, if somebody comes and applies, if they're not ready for fundraising, if, they're not doing, we say, go to 1 million cups, then come, when you're ready to do the ask, because we do have those panelists of investors. So it's basically, and we do we have the statement at the beginning. This is not an official ask because we have attorneys on our board and
All the
we're supposed to read
disclaimers.
this. Yep, all the disclaimers. But I think that that's where, because we do want, the majority have already had some sales, or at least have had that solid prototype and have a run through. So they have that data that they can talk about. So they're sort of that one level where they're like, I'm ready to go." I want right around the corner. I really want to practice this. So I think but that's sort of how we fit into the ecosystem because we do work with the 1 million cops and then they send their people to us as soon as they're like at that stage. So it's a really cool relationship.
It is, and it's the way ecosystem is supposed to work, or as I like to say, ecosysteming.
Yes, yes.
Because to me, just ecosystem was too passive, right? And ecosysteming implies that it's kinetic and it requires engagement. But it was through those types of experience I was speaking at again another, I think it was a big Kansas City conference, and I was standing up on the stage and I was seeing like at 1 million cups these connections being made, right, that had very genuine tangible benefit. And then I just had this epiphany real time from the stage where I just said, you know what? Community is a new form of currency.
Yeah.
It's not the hard dollars per se, but it is definitely a value, right? Like that kid got free office space. Like what, even if it was like in a dingy warehouse,
Right. It's free and it's a space.
that would still cost him, if he was paying, market rate, 2 grand a month, even in the cheapest, kind of thing. So, and I know I'm preaching the choir. So let's stay in the ecosystem because that's how we met. I remember, and as I said, I really do consider you among, one of the experts of the Charlotte ecosystem. And I remember my first visit, Devin and I connected. I think somebody introduced us, and I fell in love immediately with Ventureprise. Right. And this actually might have predated you because I started in 2016.
Yeah, I started in 2017.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I came into Charlotte, and it might have been Juan Garzon or another patron saint of entrepreneurship in the area, but somebody was kind enough to pull together a meeting of kind of what at that time, uh, mid 2016 was kind of like the ecosystem players, right? And I remember we were, all in a room, and there was a big U, like the seating, and there was probably 40 people in the room, and we started with the ubiquitous and polite, like, hey, introduce yourself and your organization and what you do. And so I'm the guest, so to speak. And so I'm observing and being polite, keeping my mouth shut. And I'm watching, everybody go around the big U, introduce themselves. And I had real time this epiphany. I'm looking at them. I go, I don't sense that they all know each other. And so I asked I'm sure those who organized it felt it was probably impolite for me to ask, but I genuinely was just curious. Like I said, just let me ask you, show of hands, how many of y'all know everybody in this room? And nobody could raise their hand. How many of you know at least half the people in this room? And there was like maybe 3 hands that went up. And that was my critique of the Charlotte ecosystem back then, was that there was no what I called center of gravity, right? And there's a whole bunch of conditions why, but that's why we got so vested as heavily as we did in Ventureprise, because if there was a place to be the center of gravity, that the thing that stood out for us in particular, and I'm taking you for a long walk, but there's a reason for it.
Yeah.
I'm gonna land this plane here in a second. The reason it was for it was Devin, to his credit, and I think by this time you were probably on board too, and helped him kind of encourage him to come to this. But you were one of our very first ecosystem partner grantees and multiple offenders.
Actually, that's why I was hired, I'm going to say, because they got that, and then I was originally hired to help with that, and then they were like, "Wait, you're gonna do more." But yes, that's exactly they had just started because I had worked with Devin and Paul. They had helped with my startup, but I had always been in contact with them.
Paul was the one. Paul Wettenhall. He was the one who organized that meeting for my benefit. Thank you.
Yes. Yep.
Um, so yes, so the thing was, the reason you guys we were just like, hell yeah, we're gonna make this grant, because for the listeners, you might not understand, when we issue these ecosystem grants, it is not prescriptive or directive. We don't presume to know what you need in your ecosystem. The charge in the application is basically tell us what you need and convince us. Write us a love letter. Convince us that supporting your capacity, right? I there's some magical memories and experiences and things I learned 7 years at the Coffin Foundation, but there's also some things I learned not to do, and that is assume complete knowledge. Like, hey, we got the money, so we know everything. Nothing could be further from the truth.
And all of our areas are different. I mean, there's even parts of Charlotte that are different, but
Exactly.
I can't even imagine what you as this keeper of all, trying to really rally, like that was where I really saw you all taking charge in terms of, okay, this is all centered here because we're in Raleigh. Let's start touching some people. Let's start getting some partners in it. And I think that was amazing.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, yeah, there was a lot, and we go into that another time. But the point I want to make here was you all were the very first, and I think only. I don't know that that's ever changed, but you were the very first ecosystem partner that said, "Hey, one of the things we want to do that we will be held accountable for, right, is we are going to get more Charlotte-based founders to go successfully through the seed grant program."
Biggest push. Yeah.
Bam, and you put it out there. And here's a little pro tip to any of you aspiring grant writers that are listening to this. That is, in a humble way, quite flattering to the entity that's going to write the check, right? Like, you're going to say a primary goal is to get more qualified founders to come through your program. And this is where I'm saying I'm tying it all the way around. So fast forward now to the present, right? I've got Juan was at our, is one of our trusted partners, and he just shared a recent copy of the new 2024 Charlotte Startup Ecosystem Report. And one of the things I was pleasantly surprised to read in it was that of the things they're going to be continuing to track, for the region, is this point of crowing that Charlotte companies have increased their participation in NCIDS seed grants from 8% of the total in 2006 through 2015 to 18% between 2016 and 2024. And that is great.
And I'll do a humble brag there. A lot of we had at least 70% most of the time had gone through the customer discovery programming.
Oh, without a doubt. And your applicants was clear because back in the earlier days, the customer discovery part was we don't hammer it as hard, and not so many people were going through the NSF
ICOR and all that.
ICOR, thank you, where customer discovery is the primary focus, right? And so, like, that was, again, super impressive. That number is awesome. But now here's my cautionary tale, as I recently shared with Juan, because he wanted me to make sure I saw that. I said, "Oh, you didn't have to point that out to me, buddy. I saw it. But here's the question I have for you." And no disrespect to your old shop, with that change that came with the change in the name, I'm trying not to be a jerk here. Like, there's been other changes, and I don't think it's been for the better. And I'm going to tell the listener, our early data shows that it's not. It's been a change not for the better. And so my question to Juan was, like, how are you guys going to feel when you update this next year and that number is no longer 18%? It's down to 12. And then the year after, it's back down to the original 8% or lower. Is there anybody in the community, other than those of us that were so vested, like you and Devin and others, right? You guys are all the ones, the soldiers that do the thankless work. Does anybody even care?
I still write love letters to customer discovery anytime I talk to people about entrepreneurship. So I'm hoping that it's somewhere out there, because it is literally like when we even do pitch breakfast, when I do different events, I just did a customer discovery workshop for the generator program. I still because I've been able to turn it a little bit, but I now preach it because this is what I do in my job daily now at Everblue. I legitimately drive around and talk to the agencies that we work with. I talk to our partners, but it's not, hey, do you like this? Or hey, what can we do? It's walk me through your day. Okay, so where are you struggling? Okay, why do you think you're struggling? And really coming back and talking, because we do software solutions, we do training solutions, we do, so I come back and say, okay, here's what we need to do for this program. Here's some things. Here's their number one pain point. Here's where they're really getting tripped up. But I still do customer discovery. And I think part of it is I was a talk show producer. So when in my first career, I say, and I had to talk to people very quickly, in terms of if they were going to be good on air or not. I had to so it was a lot of not asking them direct questions. It was sort of seeing if they would expand or if they would just answer yes or no and put them in buckets. So I did it to an extent there. But then when I started with with our startup, and learn what it was officially called, customer discovery, I just like, that's all I wanted to do, and that's all, like, I just literally fell in love with it, and to show what it still does, and this is how you can scale, and this is such an integral part. And I tell people when we talk about the NC idea, micro and seeds, just do it, because you're going to see what you're missing when you do those applications. You're going to see where you need to go do the work. And so I'm hoping that, that it doesn't quite go away, because I can't imagine people starting out in their ventures and not understanding how important that is. And I always like to say, no, it's not the sexy part. It's not this really fun part that's going, I find it really fun because I'm that weird person, but I will tell you how much time, how much energy, how much resources it's going to save you when you take the time to do that customer discovery. So, yes, sadly, I still do love letters to it a lot.
Yeah, I'm wondering if we were eating our own dog food, if and that, this comment's really intended for my producer, Christian. I wonder if we should have consulted with Laura and done some discovery on whether or not I would have been a good on-air personality. Maybe we would have never launched the ecosysteming podcast if we had a professional opinion.
It's a natural conversation. You are amazing. You're doing a natural conversations with people in your network, and people find out more about them. You can't ask for more than that when you do these types of programs. So I'm going to be in your favor.
I'll credit where it's due. It's in the guests, right? And I think there's a theme that if you've listened to two or more of the pods, I think a theme that comes through is that we start with shared values, and I think that's one thing. Whenever we have an event that brings all of our partners together, there's this. It's always a sense like it's a family reunion, because even though we all have in our own microcosms or micro ecosystems, we have unique nuance and things that we have to deal with. And to your point, we have been very intentional in reaching out statewide, and we don't presume that like what they need to do down east is going to work out west, right, or at the coast, or Charlotte, Triad, whatever. But there are commonalities across everybody's, and that common ground is that's the excuse, if you will, to bring us together, and then we can help each other on the fringe. Like, okay, so we don't have the funds that you have in the triangle, so how can we help out? If it's Hatch, out in Asheville, for example, how can we help get more funding exposure? And then people can start playing the network game, and well, I'm connected to so and so, so maybe we can ask a favor and have somebody come out and do a pitch breakfast or something like that. That's where the magic, that kind of goes back to our conversation around community being a form of currency.
And I think it's important that you realize what somebody is bringing to the table and don't recreate it. Do something that, if you're really passionate and maybe feel like it's not being done exactly like you, do something that complements it. Because once you start trying, like I see less of that, which is amazing, just even around the state in general. But I think when you work with people and complement each other's programs, and okay, we're going to do this, and then once they grow, that's when we're going to send them to you, and then once they do this, they're going to be ready for this. And I think when you start having it's not until you have those conversations and really sit and talk to people and see what they're passionate about and what they're doing and how they're doing it, basically doing customer discovery within your ecosystem, but then you're
There's a
not saying,
theme
"Okay, let's
here.
do this." Yes, but it's I think that's so important, and that's one thing that I guess we could do it as a university. When I first started at UNC Charlotte, we were just this space because we were university affiliated. We could have all these different avenues and we could host all these different. So I think that was the good point, and sort of us being that center when we were one of the first ones to get, the ecosystem grant, but we were able to educate and sort of take that position of, we're from the university, we're bringing, the research in, we're bringing the innovation, because that's where that magic and that scalability happen, is when you're doing that research and you're looking at the possibilities. And our goal was always to really invite the community to come in and be a part of that and see how it could fit together in certain ways. And I think that, and then you just started seeing all these different programs pop up that were very complementary of each other, and sort of, you have different, people do it, you have some of the people focusing on high school that are getting ready to come to UNC Charlotte. So we would say, okay, we're going to take 5 of your graduates and offer them some programming at UNC Charlotte. So it's just sort of looking at those types of fittings, per se, to really do that.
I think back to the cycle, and as is the case with any organization that does something similar to ours, you always have demand in excess of your ability and capacity to serve, which is just a fancier way of saying we don't have enough money to fund everything that should get funded. And so the very first cohort that you were part of, it was still experimental. Like we didn't codify it per se as like, oh yeah, we're going to have an ecosystem partner program. We just said we issued, I think it was 12 originally, ecosystem grants. And so, and we had, I don't know, 60 plus applications. And so when that first announcement went out, you always get people that are disappointed, right? That they didn't get it. And invariably, when it came to people questioning me about, well, why'd you fund Venture Prize? Right. And I'm not saying these complaints were coming from other university based programs, but they were coming from other university based programs. And I was like, well, let me tell you why. Yours, it was always fun answering that question. When somebody targeted Venture Prize, you guys in particular, it was so easy to shut it down, to say, well, they put themselves out there and on the hook to increase the number. They started with their client first, which is, by the way, our client too. We all work for the founder, for the startup, right? And they said, if you give us this money, we will take these resources and try to make our clients more competitive in your grant process, thereby strengthening our ecosystem here, helping these people, right? And I said, like, that's how they won. It's not there wasn't some secret handshake, you and I weren't sorority sisters in a past life, right? It was just, you put it out there and said, these are our goals. This is what we'll be on the hook for. We don't know yet how we're going to do it, but it's entrepreneurship. So we'll just try and iterate. And it was easy. Frankly, it was one of the easiest ones we made.
Well, and I think that's to credit also Paul and Devin, because Paul was one of the ones that, did the original ecosystem report as with the Charlotte, and he's a very like numbers guy too. Like that's just how he sees things and can sort of, and that was one thing I very much learned from him and Devin as well, just in terms of, okay, this is how we're going to approach this. This is how many we take per cohort. This is how many cohorts we're doing. This is, and sort of like taking it down, because I came in right at the tail end of their first pilot of their cohort. And because that was one of the reasons, because I had actually participated in the original iCore program back in 2014. And, so they were like, "You're the person to be able to do, because you've been through," and that's how I taught it for a while. Listen, I would say, "Listen, I was right where you guys are. I know the uncomfortableness. I know all of that." So, they sort of hired me to be that community person, because they were focused on certain things. So they were like, okay, let's bring you in, and you're going to be the person that goes out and really talks to the community about the importance of this, and you're going to be, bringing in the people. So that was my challenge, and that was one that's again where I love that challenge because I knew what they had done. I knew where those people were setting.
So, okay, I think we have more than established. I mean, I think we slam dunked your credentials that, like, what you're talking about with that ecosystem. So with that, if this was like a trial, right, and you're the expert witness giving testimony on the stand. So with your expert credentials, and I'm always thinking about my cousin Vinny when I hear this, as an expert in the field, what would you say are the one or two things, good or challenging otherwise? Like, what do people still not get about the Charlotte entrepreneurship ecosystem?
I think it's getting there. I We just had Seed the South. Seed the South was amazing. It brought a lot of good mojo. I just saw Mark McDowell in the lobby, and he was just like, "Oh my gosh," so everybody is still on that. I think the important part, and Sam Smith and I both spoke about this before she went on to do her talk the second morning at the kickoff, actions. So we've had this great round, this great 2 days of all of this information. Now let's not have meetings about it. Let's actually do some action items. And I think that that's to come. And I think that's to a lot of people's credit. We're starting to do that graduation. I think we are, of course, a banking hub, but I think being known for more than that is also something that they're embracing. It's sort of coming in with all these other different industries, per se. So I think that those challenges in terms of this, where we want to have those scalable, and it comes from action items. It comes from understanding how to do that, and it's bringing in research or very innovative products. It's really looking at that technology and what you can do to make those scalable. So I think it's been pointed out. I think it's been approached. I think even the report that you just showed, that was one of the things that it said, and I completely agree with it, is we've got to get, we've got to really embrace these scalable, take the risks on these businesses and these ideas that can be really scalable, and that sometimes is not always backed by numbers. That sometimes understanding the founder, being understanding that founder's going to get it done, and investing in that founder.
You know, I think I was maybe 2 years into the job, so I was here long enough to have kind of now like a basic understanding of all the nuance to the different regions in the state and what the entrepreneurial potential ecosystem potential was. And I remember for a couple of years there, I was saying this line when I was in your back in your network there, and people would react when I said this, and I was always like, "Wow, you guys need some confidence." I'd said, when you consider the amount of resources that are in Mecklenburg, the region, you guys could outperform the Triangle in the startup sense, right? You absolutely could. Because what I was getting was I was always getting this sibling rivalry and like, like it's still probably for 5 years in. That was why I had the great fortune of having Greg Brown from the Charlotte Angel Fund join our board, because he would be my defense whenever we'd issue, okay, here are the grant winners. And then we'd see on social media all the snarky BS like, oh yeah, no Charlotte companies again, blah, blah, blah. And, Greg would always come to our defense and say, hey, we got to be better, right? This is not charity, what NCIDEA does. Like, we have to be better. And I think the raw material is there. And I don't, I'm kind of like a proud dad. So I don't think one of my kids is better than the other kid, but I think like they could all make the varsity team, right? If they just put the effort in. And I think that's the difference. But like it was weird because I could push back on something that I intended as a compliment. And maybe that was my own limitation in thinking that it wouldn't be received as a compliment. But I still say that this many years later, there's so much capital there. There's so many bright people. There's so much, experienced management there. Like if that ecosystem was more inviting, more open, more, plugging in, you know, like you have guys like Keith Ludman, who's on my board, right? That's an exited serial dude with world-class, talent and experience. Like, get them off the bench and into the game.
It's risk taking.
And then at someday the triangle will wake up and go, man, we need to compete with Charlotte.
Yeah, it's being a part of that. Absolutely, no, 100%. It's taking those risks and really looking at that and saying, "Okay, we don't wanna miss out." Like, we really need to get on that, and I think, I've seen some growth in that. I've seen a shift in some of the ways, that some people think in terms of risk taking, so I'm excited. I always, want to be there to help and sort of make sure that they're doing it in a methodical way. And but no, it's really exciting. But that's something that I think is plain as day as in that in that report. And because if you show like the report has that qualitative data along with the quantitative, and so that's good to have that mix to show what's needed, what's mixed, and things like that. And I think that that's something that people actually should really I think something Juan is doing, but it's going in and talking about the report. And I think that that's important for people, not to expect people to read it from front to back because not a lot of people are. You've got to give them the snippets.
Well, there's an executive summary. There's a short and a long. I've got both printed out. We killed a tree or two. But so it always comes down to the people, and that's how I guess I'll land the plane here. And this is something, I don't know if you watched to the end of or listened to the end of any of my pods, but I'd like to do this kind of social networking and ask the question, if you had to venture a guess, how many mutual connections do we have on LinkedIn? What would you guess?
Gosh, I'm gonna say, I'm gonna say 75 to 100, if not more.
You would be off by about 200.
Okay, there we
We
go.
have
See, I was gonna
287 mutual connections, including the aforementioned Juan Garcon, Jose Alvarez, a relatively newcomer. He's also on my board, right? Steve Lewis at Boostpad, Liz Brigham, Hurt Hub, and if I can take again any paternal pride, it's just in this that like I think NCIDS in a small way helped build this network.
Oh, 100%.
I think we feel lucky for it, and certainly we're lucky for our affiliation with you, Laura. You have been such a resource for us. You are a reviewer. You are the only external from staff that helps us do selection of micro.
I love that. I love it. I love that part. Yes.
I mean, that's how much confidence we have in you, because that's I don't want to sound all elitist here, but like we wouldn't let anybody just come in off the street and do that.
Yeah, no, I very much appreciate. I've always really, really enjoyed the relationship with everybody there. And I've always considered it a great resource. And as I said, like I tell everybody, listen, no matter what, it is to go through the process of applying for that, listening to what other people, getting that feedback, going through that process. It is one of the most important things you're going to do as a founder. And I will never not stress that part of it because you learn so much about your business and yourself that it's invaluable. And that's a resource that you have provided. And then it sort of extended it almost to the ecosystem partners, the people that are helping do that. And that's the cool meta layers, if you might want to say, that sort of work, coincide together.
Oh, on the seed final days presentation, the entire state is represented in that room of 40-ish people, every part of the state. And well, we are certainly the beneficiaries of your generosity, your generous spirit, and contribution of time and talent. Thank you so very much for that. And I can't wait to bump into you, hopefully in the not too distant future.
Thank you so much. It's been great catching up with you. And yes, we'll definitely see each other soon.
Stay connected with NC Idea on LinkedIn and Facebook, and subscribe to our newsletter for all the latest as we celebrate our 20th year. Catch new episodes of Ecosysteming every other Tuesday. Thanks for tuning in and being a part of this thing of ours.